Harold Mitchell's hands were the first thing the building manager noticed. Too careful, too calculated, as if he was observing everything around him. But when asked, he would just smile and say gardening is tough work. The day his neighbors were kidnapped, everyone's perception of Harry would change forever. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If stories of hidden expertise and unexpected heroism resonate with you, subscribe for more tales of extraordinary people hiding their remarkable past in plain sight. The morning sun cast long shadows across the courtyard of Maple Ridge Apartments as Harold Harry Mitchell made his daily rounds through the garden. At 73, he had maintained the same precise routine for the past 15 years, arriving at exactly 6:30 a.m., checking each plant bed with methodical care, adjusting the automatic sprinkler heads with surgical precision. To the residents of the four-story complex, Harry was simply the old gardener, quiet, dependable, almost invisible in his faded work clothes and weathered baseball cap. He lived alone in a small ground-floor unit, kept to himself, and seemed content with his flowers and shrubs. Building manager Patricia Chen had worked at Maple Ridge for 8 years, and Harry had been there when she started. Something about him had always intrigued her, though she couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. Perhaps it was the way he moved, too fluid, too aware of his surroundings for a man of his age. Or maybe it was his hands, which despite his 73 years, remained steady and precise, handling delicate seedlings with the same care a surgeon might use with medical instruments. "Morning, Harry," Patricia called out as she approached the main entrance, keys jingling in her hand. Harry looked up from where he was pruning rose bushes, offering her his usual gentle smile. "Good morning, Patricia. Beautiful day for the gardens. The flower beds look incredible this year." "You really have a gift." Harry's weathered face crinkled with what appeared to be modest pleasure. "Gardening is tough work, but rewarding when you understand the fundamentals." Something in his phrasing, "understand the fundamentals," struck Patricia as oddly precise, almost clinical. But Harry had already returned his attention to the roses, and she dismissed the thought as she headed inside to begin her day. The Maple Ridge complex housed 48 families, a mix of young professionals, retirees, and small families drawn by the quiet neighborhood and well-maintained grounds. Harry knew them all by sight, though few knew much about his background beyond his role as gardener. He had worked for the property management company for 15 years, ever since his retirement from what he vaguely described as government work. Third-floor residents Tom and Jennifer Walsh lived in Unit 3B with their 8-year-old daughter Emma. Tom worked in it consulting while Jennifer taught elementary school. They were among the few residents who made an effort to chat with Harry during his garden rounds, and Emma had adopted him as a sort of honorary grandfather, often helping him water plants during summer evenings. "Mr. Harry," Emma would say, carefully pronouncing his name with the formality children use with respected adults. "Why do you always look around so much when you're working?" Harry would smile and ruffle her hair. "A good gardener watches everything, sweetheart. Plants tell you what they need if you pay attention." But Tom had noticed it too, the way Harry's eyes constantly swept their surroundings, cataloging details, assessing potential threats that seemed to exist only in his mind. It reminded Tom of his brother, who had served 3 tours in Afghanistan, and returned with the same hyper-vigilant awareness of his environment. On Tuesday morning, October 15th, Harry was adjusting the drip irrigation system when he heard raised voices from the 3rd floor. Living on the ground level with windows facing the courtyard, he was accustomed to the normal sounds of apartment life: children playing, television's occasional arguments. But this was different. The voices were unfamiliar, aggressive, and they were coming from the Walsh apartment. Harry straightened slowly, his gardening tools forgotten as his full attention focused on the sounds above. 3 distinct male voices, none of them Tom's. Jennifer's voice high with fear, Emma crying. Moving with surprising quiet for a man of his age, Harry positioned himself beneath the Walsh's balcony, using the large oak tree as cover. His movements were no longer those of an elderly gardener, but of someone trained in surveillance and reconnaissance. "Please, just take whatever you want," he heard Jennifer say, her voice trembling. "Don't hurt my daughter." "Shut up and sit down," came a harsh reply. "We're not here for your stuff, lady. Your husband owes some people money, and now it's collection time." Harry's expression hardened. This wasn't a simple burglary. It was a targeted kidnapping, likely connected to gambling debts or other financial problems. His mind automatically began assessing the situation. 3 perpetrators, at least 1 firearm based on the authority in their voices, civilians in immediate danger. For 15 years, Harry had successfully maintained his cover as a simple apartment gardener. He had buried Harold Mitchell, the CIA operative who had spent 30 years in deep cover operations, and become Harry the gardener, content with his quiet retirement. But now, hearing Emma's frightened sobs, that carefully constructed anonymity was about to be shattered. Moving with practiced stealth, Harry made his way to the building's rear entrance, using his master key to enter without alerting the kidnappers to additional movement in the building. The hallways were empty. Most residents had left for work, and those remaining were likely unaware of the crisis developing on the 3rd floor. Harry climbed the stairs with controlled urgency, his 73-year-old body moving with an efficiency that belied his apparent age. As he reached the 3rd floor, he could hear the kidnappers more clearly through the Walsh's door. "Boss wants to see the whole family," one was saying. "Package deal, nice and clean. What about the kid?" Boss didn't say anything about leaving witnesses. Harry's jaw tightened. These weren't professional kidnappers. They were sloppy, talking too freely about their intentions. That made them more dangerous, not less, because unprofessional criminals were unpredictable. From his pocket, Harry removed what appeared to be an ordinary apartment maintenance key ring, but attached to it was a small device that most people would mistake for a hearing aid battery. He pressed it against the doorframe, and listened through a tiny earpiece, as the electromagnetic sensor gave him a clearer picture of the apartment's layout, and the positions of everyone inside. 3 men positioned throughout the living room. Jennifer and Emma on the couch. Tom apparently not yet home from work, which meant the kidnappers were waiting for him to return before moving their prisoners to a secondary location. Harry had perhaps 30 minutes to resolve the situation before Tom's arrival complicated everything. Moving to apartment 3A, Harry used his master key to enter the vacant unit that shared a wall with the Walsh's apartment. The Hendersons had moved out the previous month, and the apartment remained empty pending renovations. In the vacant bedroom that backed up to the Walsh's living room, Harry began what appeared to be routine maintenance work, but was actually the setup for a tactical intervention. From his gardening cart, which he had retrieved with remarkable efficiency, he removed tools that served dual purposes. His soil pH tester was actually a military-grade listening device. His plant fertilizer spray bottle contained a fast-acting sedative compound that could be dispersed as an aerosol. His pruning shears were modified with a small cutting torch capable of breaching walls. Within 20 minutes, Harry had created a small precise opening in the wall between the apartments, positioned at a height and angle that would give him visual access to the living room while remaining undetected. Through his improvised surveillance port, Harry assessed the tactical situation with the cold precision of his former profession. 3 subjects, armed with what appeared to be semi-automatic pistols. The leader, a heavy-set man in his 40s, positioned near the apartment's main entrance. 2 subordinates, younger and clearly less experienced, stationed near the balcony door and kitchen respectively. Jennifer and Emma huddled together on the couch, both showing signs of shock but no apparent physical injuries. The kidnappers seemed content to wait for Tom's return rather than risk moving their prisoners during daylight hours. Harry checked his watch. 2:47 p.m. Tom's usual arrival time was 4:15 p.m. That gave him approximately 90 minutes to neutralize 3 armed criminals, and secure the hostages without alerting other residents or escalating the situation into a siege. Moving with the methodical precision that had kept him alive through 3 decades of covert operations, Harry began implementing a plan that would have impressed his former colleagues at Langley. First, he accessed the building's HVAC system through the maintenance panel in the vacant apartment. Using his modified fertilizer sprayer, he introduced a mild sedative compound into the air circulation system serving the Walsh apartment, not enough to incapacitate the kidnappers, but sufficient to slow their reaction times and cloud their judgment over the next hour. Next, he activated a small device that would interfere with cell phone signals within the apartment, preventing the kidnappers from communicating with their associates or calling for backup. Finally, Harry positioned himself for direct intervention. Through his wall opening, he had a clear line of sight to all 3 perpetrators. His soil aerator, actually a compressed air weapon capable of delivering tranquilizer darts, would allow him to neutralize the threats without risking injury to the hostages. At 3:20 p.m., Harry began his assault. The first dart took down the man near the kitchen, who simply slumped forward onto the counter as if he had suddenly fallen asleep. The sedative was fast-acting and virtually silent. The second dart struck the subordinate near the balcony door before he could react to his partner's collapse. He managed a single step toward the couch before the tranquilizer took effect. The leader, realizing something was wrong, spun toward the hostages with his weapon raised. What the hell? Harry's third dart caught him in the neck before he could complete his threat. The man's gun clattered to the floor as he collapsed beside the coffee table. Jennifer, Emma. Harry's voice came calmly through the improvised wall opening. You're safe now. Don't move from the couch until I come around to the front door. Jennifer stared at the wall in shock, recognizing Harry's voice but unable to process what had just happened. Harry, how are you? What did you? I'll explain everything in a moment. Right now, I need you both to stay exactly where you are. Harry secured his equipment and moved quickly to the apartment's front door, using his master key to enter normally. The scene that greeted him was 3 unconscious kidnappers and 2 traumatized hostages who were staring at him as if he had materialized from thin air. Mr. Harry, Emma whispered, her voice small and confused. Did you save us? Harry knelt beside the couch, his expression gentle despite the tactical situation he had just resolved. Yes, sweetheart. The bad men are asleep now, and they won't hurt you. But how did you? Jennifer began, then stopped as she noticed details she had never observed before. Harry's movements were too controlled, too professional. His eyes constantly swept the room, checking corners and approaches with military precision, and his hands, those careful, steady hands she had always admired, were positioned in ways that suggested extensive training in combat situations. Jennifer, Harry said quietly, I need you to call 911 and tell them you've had an attempted kidnapping, but the perpetrators are unconscious and secured. Tell them to send paramedics as well as police. These men will wake up in about 2 hours with significant headaches but no permanent damage. Harry, who are you? Before he could answer, Tom's key turned in the apartment door. He entered to find his wife and daughter on the couch, 3 unconscious strangers on his living room floor, and his elderly gardener calmly zip-tying the wrists of the would-be kidnappers with what appeared to be professional restraints. What in God's name? Tom began. Daddy. Emma jumped up and ran to her father. Mr. Harry saved us from the bad men. They were going to take us away, but Mr. Harry made them go to sleep. Tom looked from his daughter to his wife to Harry, who was now efficiently searching the unconscious kidnappers and removing their weapons with the practiced motions of someone who had done this many times before. Harry, Tom said slowly, what the hell is going on? Harry straightened, holding 3 pistols with professional familiarity. These men were waiting for you to return so they could kidnap your entire family. Based on their conversation, you apparently owe money to some dangerous people. Tom's face went pale. I don't know what you're talking about. Tom. Harry's voice carried a new authority that none of them had heard before.
Now is not the time for denial. These men mentioned gambling debts and a boss who doesn't leave witnesses. If you want to protect your family, you need to be honest about what you've gotten involved in. The sirens were already approaching as Tom collapsed into a chair, his face in his hands. It started as just a few bets on football games, then basketball, then I was betting on everything just to try to get even. I owe them $60,000. Who is them? I don't know their real names. The guy I place bets with just goes by Mickey. But these guys, he gestured to the unconscious forms. They said something about the organization and how they don't give second chances. Harry nodded grimly. Local mob operation. They're probably connected to the Castellano family out of Newark. Jennifer stared at him. Harry, how do you know about organized crime families? Before Harry could answer, police officers were pounding on the door. Police, open up. Harry opened the door and immediately raised his hands to show he was unarmed. Officers, I'm Harold Mitchell. I live in this building. The situation is contained, but we have 3 unconscious suspects and 2 victims who need to give statements. Detective Maria Santos was the first investigator to arrive on scene. She had worked kidnapping cases for 12 years, but she had never encountered a situation quite like this. 3 professional kidnappers, disabled without violence, by an elderly apartment gardener who seemed to know more about police procedure than most civilians. Mr. Mitchell, she said after taking preliminary statements from the Walsh family, I need to understand exactly how a 73-year-old gardener managed to neutralize 3 armed criminals without anyone getting hurt. Harry had been dreading this conversation for the past hour. Detective, that's a complicated question. I have time. Harry glanced at the Walsh family, who were huddled together on the couch, clearly still processing everything that had happened. Emma was holding his hand, unwilling to let go of the man who had saved her from the bad men. Perhaps we could speak privately. Detective Santos led Harry into the kitchen, away from the family and the crime scene technicians who were photographing the unconscious kidnappers. Mr. Mitchell, in my experience, there are very few people who could have handled this situation the way you did. The precision, the planning, the equipment you apparently had access to, this wasn't the work of a civilian. Harry was quiet for a long moment, studying the detective's face. She was intelligent, experienced, and clearly not going to accept vague answers about his background. My name is Harold Mitchell, he said finally. I am 73 years old, and for the past 15 years, I have worked as a gardener for Maple Ridge Properties. And before that, I worked for the Central Intelligence Agency for 30 years. My last position was as a senior operative specializing in international counterintelligence and extraction operations. Detective Santos blinked. You're telling me you're a retired CIA agent? I'm telling you that I have certain skills that proved useful today. Skills I hoped I would never need to use again. Why didn't you just call the police when you heard what was happening? Harry's expression grew serious. Detective, those men were planning to kill the entire family once they had extracted whatever information or payment they were seeking. In a hostage situation like this, the window for safe resolution is measured in minutes, not hours. By the time police could have organized a response, Emma Walsh would likely have been dead. The detective studied his face, recognizing the weight of experience behind his words. Can you prove your CIA background? Not without making phone calls to people who would prefer not to be contacted. My retirement was comprehensive. Harold Mitchell the gardener was supposed to be my final identity. Harry looked through the kitchen doorway at Emma, who was still asking her parents how Mr. Harry had made the bad men go to sleep. I think that particular cover identity just became compromised. Over the next several hours, as statements were taken and evidence processed, the truth about Harry's background gradually emerged. Detective Santos made her own phone calls to federal contacts, and while the details remained classified, she received confirmation that Harold Mitchell had indeed been a highly decorated CIA operative with an impeccable service record. The three kidnappers regained consciousness in the hospital, where they were treated for the effects of Harry's tranquilizer compound, and subsequently charged with kidnapping, weapons violations, and conspiracy. Under interrogation, they revealed details about the gambling operation that had targeted Tom Walsh, leading to additional arrests and the dismantling of a significant illegal betting ring. Tom entered a witness protection program and relocated his family to another state, but not before Emma insisted on a proper goodbye to Mr. Harry. "Will you still be here when we come back to visit?" she asked, hugging him tightly. Harry knelt to her level, his weathered hands gentle on her shoulders. "Sweetheart, I might not be gardening here anymore, but no matter where I am, I'll always remember the little girl who helped me water the flowers." "You're the best gardener in the whole world," Emma declared with 8-year-old certainty. Harry smiled. "And you're the best gardening assistant I ever had." After the Walsh family departed, Harry found himself facing a decision he had hoped to avoid. His cover as a simple apartment gardener was thoroughly blown. Detective Santos had been discreet, but word would inevitably spread about the heroic gardener who had saved his neighbors using mysterious skills that seemed far beyond his apparent background. Patricia Chen knocked on his apartment door 3 days after the incident. "Harry," she said, when he opened the door, "we need to talk." They sat in his small living room, surrounded by the simple furnishings and gardening books that had defined his retirement identity for 15 years. "The property management company is getting inquiries from news outlets," Patricia said. "They want to interview the hero gardener who saved the kidnapped family. I've been deflecting them, but I need to know, how do you want to handle this?" Harry was quiet for several minutes. "Patricia, what if I told you that Harold Mitchell the gardener was never my real identity? I'd say that I suspected as much from the day I met you. Nobody handles delicate plants with that level of precision, unless they've had training in handling much more dangerous things." Harry smiled at her perceptiveness. "You're very observant. It's part of my job. So what do we do now? Now I have to decide whether to disappear again or find a way to adapt to having my cover blown. Would disappearing be difficult? I've done it before. New identity, new location, new profession. The agency taught us to be adaptable. But," Harry looked out his window at the garden he had tended for 15 years. Every plant, every flower bed, every carefully maintained corner represented a life he had built after decades of living in shadows and assuming false identities. "But I'm tired of running," he admitted. "I'm tired of pretending to be someone else, and for the first time in my adult life, I did something good without having to lie about who I am or hide my capabilities." Patricia nodded. "So what's the plan?" Over the following weeks, Harry worked with Detective Santos and federal authorities to establish a new identity that acknowledged his background while maintaining operational security. He became Harold Mitchell, retired federal agent, who now worked as a security consultant while continuing to maintain the Maple Ridge Gardens. The story that emerged in local news outlets was carefully crafted. A retired government security specialist had used his training to help neighbors in crisis. Details about his CIA background remained classified, but the basic facts were enough to satisfy public curiosity while protecting his operational history. 6 months later, Harry was pruning roses when a familiar voice called out behind him, "Mr. Harry." He turned to see Emma Walsh running across the courtyard, followed by her parents. The family had returned for a visit, and Emma had insisted on seeing her favorite gardener. "Look how tall you've gotten," Harry said, embracing the little girl who had helped change his life. "Daddy says you're famous now," Emma announced proudly. "That people know you're a hero." Harry looked at Tom and Jennifer, who were watching the reunion with grateful smiles. "I'm not famous, sweetheart. I'm just a gardener who had some useful skills when they were needed." "Will you teach me some of your skills?" Emma asked with the innocent directness of childhood. Harry laughed. "I can teach you about growing flowers and taking care of plants. Those are the best skills I know." As the afternoon wore on, and the Walsh family prepared to leave, Tom pulled Harry aside. "I never properly thanked you," he said. "Not just for saving us, but for giving me the wake-up call I needed. I've been clean for 6 months now, no gambling, no debts. I'm finally being the husband and father my family deserves. That's all the thanks I need," Harry replied. After they left, Harry returned to his roses, thinking about the strange journey that had brought him to this point. For 30 years, he had served his country in shadows, taking on false identities and living lies in service of missions he could never discuss. His retirement had been another kind of hiding, not from enemies, but from himself. The day Emma's family was threatened, he had been forced to choose between maintaining his anonymity and doing what was right. For the first time in his adult life, he had chosen to be exactly who he was, using his skills openly and without deception. Now, at 73, Harold Mitchell was finally living as himself. He was still the gardener who tended the flowers at Maple Ridge Apartments, but he no longer had to pretend that gardening was all he knew how to do. He had found a way to honor both sides of his identity, the man who had served his country in secret, and the man who found peace in helping beautiful things grow. Sometimes the most important transformations happen, not when we choose to change, but when circumstances force us to become who we were always meant to be. Harry had spent his career becoming other people, but saving Emma Walsh had finally allowed him to become himself. The roses bloomed more beautifully that year than they ever had before, as if they too understood that their gardener was finally free to be exactly who he was.